It's always hard to be rapporteur of a conference where there's no coffee break, because the afternoon coffee break is when you put your ideas together. So I have a couple of ideas, but I apologize if they're not together. Listening to that wonderful noontime speech, not many of you are old enough to remember Ralph Bellamy's great book, Looking Backwards, where he looked back from 1900 to the new socialist utopia, where to him that you were given what you needed and taken what you could give for you. And it was a wonderful vision, but it was quite impossible when tried. The difference between that and this wonderful speech is this vision is possible. This is a possible vision. Now, there's all kinds of natural climate changes. The Earth's tilt on the axis changes. The Earth's orbit around the sun changes. There are all kinds of natural changes. We're clearly over the top of the last ice age, and we're descending into the next ice age. It's probably 50, 75,000 years away, however, so your children don't need to worry too much. But there is strong evidence that on top of that 100,000-year cycle, there's a 200-year cycle that's caused by humans. And if it's caused by humans, it can be stopped by humans. It is not beyond human wit to undo that which we have done. So, we face a multifaceted problem. But it seems to me there's no need to say that one aspect of it is more important than any other aspect of it, or one way to attack it is more important than another way to attack it. One of the great advantages of a pluralistic form of government is that when you're uncertain, or a pluralism form of the economy, when you're uncertain, you get multiple attempts to attack the problems, and different people go at it in different ways. And that's what I think we see here. One person wants to work on prevention. Somebody else wants to work on coping. Somebody else wants to work on big system changes. Somebody else wants to make small marginal improvements. Somebody wants to use the command economy. Perfectly reasonable. If we had dictated fuel-efficient cars, if the Americans had 30 years ago, the world would have been significantly different than when they decided not to. If we had banned public cars from the center of towns and put in public transport, the world would have been different. Other people want to work with a market economy. A carbon tax is clearly a good idea. These are not competitive. These are all various ways of attacking the problem, and I say more power to somebody who wants to attack it in the other way than I want to attack it. Both of them will be useful. The only caveat is we don't want to have measures that make things worse. And of course that's very important, particularly when talking about coping, that you don't do something that copes with the water problem but adds more to the emissions problem. Now, this means that because there are all these ways of doing it, we really must be aware. We're all in the same boat together. We all stand or fall, sink or swim together. We must beware of arguing among ourselves. My favorite approach is this: therefore you're an idiot because you're doing something different. We really must beware of that. I heard this morning from an otherwise very sensible and interesting discussion that it was wrong for me to get into a debate about the carbon tax versus the cap and trade tax. Working through market incentives is one very important way we're going to accomplish a bit of this problem. And it is important to know whether we can get more out of a carbon tax than we can out of a cap and trade tax. It doesn't diminish somebody else who wants to attack some other problem, but we really don't advance it if we fight among ourselves saying, you're wasting your time dealing with that aspect of the problem because my aspect's more important. Now, I stress that because I've heard a whole too many debates amongst people who are all in the same lifeboat arguing that I should be pulling on my oar instead of your oar. Now, this is a big problem, as was said. It was described as social dysfunction this morning. I don't like that term. I think these are unforeseen consequences, social consequences of perfectly natural and, in the short run, beneficial individual actions. Nobody wants to go back to 1700 with a life expectancy of 30. where half the children born died in the first year, where almost every adult was maimed by various kinds of diseases and pockmarked, and so on and so on. Nobody wants to go back to that world. Growth in technology has taken us to a world which is distinctly an improvement in the sense that nobody would go back to it. So what's happened? What's happened is that we had externalities, the economists call them. We had unforeseen social consequences of what looked very sensible privately. And that's the way to understand the problem, and that's the way to try to attack it. It's more, as was said, than just climate change. There is climate change. We're destroying the fish population. We're polluting. We're making people die of lung diseases. We are creating dust belts, and so on and so on. It is a big problem, of which climate change is one important thing. Now, two aspects of the problem that were mentioned is that we're probably going to double the world's gross domestic product in about 35 years. Enormous strain on all of the resources of the world. And population is probably going to stabilize at about 30% more than what it is today. Now, we can do something about the second one, and the new American administration will stop its madness of refusing to support those international agencies that contribute to birth control. And of course, as is well known, educating women is one of the most effective contraceptive programs that have ever been invented. But there's nothing we can do about the GDP. We can change its form, but we're not going to have people in the less developed countries saying, you guys are rich, but we're going to stay poor to save the environment. Let me tell you the story. About 10 years ago, I was one of, less than 10 years, well, the year before the Tiananmen Square, I was one of a dozen Canadian economists who went on a delegation to Beijing, and we met with all of the senior planners. And the excitement a year of just before Tiananmen Square was palpable. It was wonderful. We talked to them all. They were so excited. What we said to them and Beijing, every morning, the magic of whoosh, as a million bicycles rode to work. Not a car in the street, except for the officials. The rest bicycles. And it was a wonderful, unpolluted, great city. And to a person, we said to them, you got a chance to skip the automobile age. You got a chance to stand up and lead the world. Put in public transport. Make it free. Ban cars. And you will be the envy of the world. To a person, the former Marxists, the liberals, a lot of them all said, we want to be like America. That is success. We want to grow. Every Chinaman should have a car. Well, if given that opportunity, they flummoxed it. How can we be surprised that in a pretty good society, in a society we're in, our politicians flummox the chances to do something that would benefit the society? We're up against a really serious problem that it's very hard to institute change and make the politicians grab it. Now, it's not impossible, but we've got to accept that it's a big problem. Now, fighting big changes requires big efforts. We can, I think, shoot in the end to be a carbon-free society and then develop the carbon sinks that will take up from the past excesses. But the public must be with us. And here I find very difficult balance between my science and my politics. If you diminish the problem, people say, okay, it'll go away, don't worry about it. If you say the problem's so bad, we're all likely to be dead, people say, let's not worry about it, apathetic. You got to say, somewhere in the middle, there's a pretty serious problem, but there's hope. You need those speeches given. There's hope. If you ask me, don't tell anybody, if you ask me to make a bet, what bet would I make? It would not be very optimistic. You know, my assessment of the political system is that it's going to be touch and go whether we get the changes we need before we pass the tipping point. But that you can't say, because look, we could make it. We can get there. It is possible that we can get there. You never know that you're going to win or lose until you fight. I've won two very big political battles in my life. Both of them I was told there's not a chance. Not a hope, not a chance. Go away, do something useful. I didn't. I didn't waste my time. And I won both of them. And I learned from that you never know if you're going to lose a battle until you fight it. You don't go away because someone says you're going to lose. You fight, and then you see if you win. Even though I think this is a tough, hard, uphill battle, we need to fight it. We need to fight it with all the strength we have. Now, if we're going to have change, this is the pluralism again. We can use monetary incentives, like a carbon tax. We can use laws, mandating higher mileage cars. We can use government assistance. Very few major technologies in the 20th century have been developed without public assistance at the beginning. One of the big problems, I was a trade negotiator one part of my life, one of the big problems dealing with the Americans is they believe their own mythology. They believe they have a purely market economy. Every single technology of which the Americans led in the 20th century was developed at the early stages with substantial public support, then turned over to the private sector, which did a pretty good job on it. So, the technologies of the green revolution, the green energy, need substantial public support. Look at Germany, where enormous public support has gone into green. And according to the Passionate Eye last week, the biggest single employer in Germany in 5 years from now will be green energy. Don't let anybody tell you there's no economic advantage in going green. Bush persuaded most of my friends in the United States that it was going to be an enormous economic cost to going green. In fact, the advantages that you create, especially if you get in there first and develop technologies that you can sell to the rest of the world, are enormous. So government assistance is another. Changing your values. Now, we've had a lot of discussion about development without growth. Now, if we can change people's values, then that's going to be a big contribution. We let them respond to monetary incentives, but we also change their values. I'm pessimistic about being able to do too much about it, but in my pluralist technique, I encourage enormously anybody who wants to take the tag, trying to persuade people directly. It's not in your particular interest, but it's in the social interest. Change your values and to become more green.